Hey, pushers. Let's get started for the year with some notes. We'll talk about very early colonization with the British, the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch. Okay. And I'm going to hide my face over here so it's not a distraction as we go through the notes. Remember, every day after the notes on an asynchronous day, we'll come back together on a live day and we'll meet. And if you have any questions about the notes, just jot them down and we'll go over them. Okay. All right. So here we go. So this is it covers chapters 2 through 5 in the Out of Many book. Like I mentioned, it's Spanish, French, Dutch, and British early colonization. And these are your asynchronous notes for the 17th of August. And remember, my suggestion to you earlier is to write the notes down as we go through them. So you'll have a bank of notes to draw from when we take unit tests, the midterm, the final, and the AP exam. Okay, let's get started. Now, this is a map of North America before European contact. And you can see the names of the American Indian tribes. There were so many more that are included on this list, but it's a really diverse group of people. And you'll see as the Europeans encounter them and as we start going through this, the elimination of tribe after tribe after tribe. So, very diverse groups of American Indians. In the East, you mostly had the Cherokee and the Iroquois and the Powhatan. They were um, a farming group of people. They had settled in villages. Many lived in long houses made of logs. Okay, we're not talking about Indians that lived in teepees yet. Those are the Plains Indians we'll discuss in a minute. Okay, so here's what villages look like. They grew what was referred to as maize or corn. Then the Indians of the Great Plains, and these are, if you watch like a Western, these are the American Indians that are depicted in that. So you have the Lakota, which are sometimes referred to as Sioux, and then the Cheyenne and the Comanche. And before the Spanish and before the introduction of the horse into the Americas, we had mass hunting techniques. And these are called buffalo jumps. And what the Plains Indians would do is funnel buffalo to a cliff and then stampede them off of the cliff. Okay. And jobs in American Indian culture were very gender specific. So the men would hunt, and the women, after the buffalo had fallen to their death, would gut them and skin them and deal with the hides. Now, during the Renaissance in Europe, this really drives because of new inventions and new ways of thinking. It's really going to drive an age of exploration. So you can see how the Portuguese, then the Spanish, then the British, then the French start creating trade routes around the world to trade with different peoples of the world. And the world starts to shrink, not the way that we have it today, but it becomes much smaller with the trade goods that they're dealing with. Now, in 1492, remember, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and it's discovered in quotes because it's very difficult to discover an area where people are already living. He discovered it for the Europeans. And if you remember back to last year in world history, you probably talked about the 3 Gs: God, gold, and glory. Okay. Um, the Spaniards really were driven by all three. Cortez conquers the Aztecs in 1521, vast supplies of gold. And then in 1532, Pizarro conquers the Incas, and the Incas had much more silver. And the Spanish are very violent in conquering. You can see in this etching right here where people are being hanged and burned. And he is going to take this young child, this Spanish conquistador, and dash his brains out on this wall. It's just horrific the way people were treated. Okay, this is a Spanish mission, and this is the one in Santa Fe. And missions were set up all over the southeast and the southwest, and throughout Central and Southern America. Okay, the Spanish will acquire so much wealth that in the long run it will hurt their empire because it causes so much inflation. So Spain dominated um, Central and South America and the southeastern and southwestern regions of the United States. And you can see on this map where De Soto will land in pretty much present day Tampa Bay. And as he was searching for gold, different tribes would tell him, "We don't have it, but the people down the road do." And he ends up dying along the Mississippi River, and then his men escape. Then Coronado searches much of the American Southwest, ends up in modern day Kansas, and then heads back. So, not only with the gold, but Catholicism, because Spain is a Catholic nation. And you can see all the red dots on this map. These are Spanish missions that are all set up around the American, modern day United States Southwest and Southeast. This will later trigger the Pueblo Revolt. Sometimes it's known as Pope's Revolt. That is not the Pope's Revolt, it is Pope, and he led a Pueblo Revolt. And in this region of the United States, the Spanish were expelled for roughly 12 years. Now, gold mining haciendas are set up, and then the encomienda system. And with the encomienda system, I would assume that you talked about that last year. The encomienda system is like a plantation system, but it's different in the typical plantation system because on a typical plantation system, you acquired the land. The Spanish empire gave people land, but you not only got the land, you got the people that lived on the land as your possession as well. Okay. So you probably talked about this last year. Viceroys were sent, and they are the royal governors, and they are sent from Spain to the New World, and they are at the top of the social hierarchy. The next group are the Creoles, and the Creoles were people that were of Spanish descent but born in the New World. Then you have people of mixed race, and they were typically referred to as mestizos. That is a mix between people of Spanish descent and then American Indians. And then at the bottom of Spanish society's pyramid, you have people that are purely American Indians, and then people that are stolen from Africa and brought to the New World and enslaved. Now, this is going to trigger the Columbian Exchange because goods are brought from the Old World, Europe, to the New World, and then goods are brought from the New World to the Old World. And these are some of the most noteworthy. The real animal that goes from the west to the east is the turkey. Okay. And then you get tomatoes and corn and potatoes that go to Europe. Then you have a lot of grains like wheat and rice and barley that were not grown in the New World. They existed in the Old World and were brought over to the New World. And different animals, cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses, did not exist in the Americas before Europeans brought them over. You also get the negativity of that with disease. And disease is brought, and most notably is smallpox and the flu. And you can see what happens to the population of Central America. 1519, 25.3 million, down to almost like 1608. You're only 1 million people because of the mass die-off because of the introduction of European diseases, which American Indians had no immunity to. So the success of the Spanish, different European nations now look around and say, oh my gosh, we can go and become rich as well. So the French send over Samuel Champlain, and he comes down the St. Lawrence River, and you're going to get this French crescent that is created from Quebec through the Great Lakes, down the Mississippi River to what will be New Orleans. Now, the French are also a Catholic nation, and they will set up, and all the yellow here are Catholic missions that are set up by the French. And there's a French Jesuit that is meeting with the American Indians. Most of the time, the Spanish and the French were not very successful in converting American Indians to Catholicism. Now, the French came over and they profited off of mostly it's the fur industry, although they did practice some small scale farming and then the taking of lumber out of the New World. And since the French are so involved in the fur trade, they are much more friendly with the local American Indians because they need to know where the animals are. And the most popular animal at the time will be the beaver. And those are beaver pelts. So this is after you've killed and skinned the beaver, and then they put them on a big hoop and they dry it out. And then they take these beaver pelts and they are used for fashionable hats that will be sold in Europe. It's not like a raccoon skin cap. This has all the beaver hair has been taken off of it, and that's the beaver pelt that is used to make the hat. Huguenots, which hopefully you remember from last year, those were French Protestants. At the beginning in New France, they were denied access because the French wanted a Catholic colony set up. And the French are going to be very much like the Spanish, where they're really controlled from the top down. At the top is the king, and he is going to control the commerce that is set up in the New World for the French. Now, the Dutch will come over to the New World. And if you remember talking from last year, the Dutch didn't have much of a military, but they had the largest commercial fleet in the world. And what they will do is they will establish what will be New Amsterdam and start settling up the Hudson River. And they are set up, and they have investors in what is called a joint stock company. And that would be people back in Europe that pool their money together. So they jointly invest and then they will send companies out. And they're hoping that company will strike it rich in the New World and then bring the wealth back to Europe so those investors will become wealthy. And there is a painting of a Dutch ship. And this in the background is New Amsterdam. And New Amsterdam will later become New York City, but it'll take a while. But the Dutch also invited in people of various backgrounds because the Dutch wanted to make money. And they didn't really care who you were as long as you helped make money. So, just like the Dutch, the British will set up joint stock companies. And one of those examples is the Virginia Company. Okay. Now, the British are going to come. The Spanish came for God, gold, and glory. The Dutch came for wealth. The French came to spread Catholicism and also to make money. The British are going to come for those reasons and then some. Okay, for economic, some people were escaping poverty in London to come to the New World for a new start. Some people were leaving for religious reasons, and later on in the notes, we will talk about why people left England to come to the New World for, quote unquote, in their reasoning, religious freedom. Some were escaping violence, and when there's a violence like the English Civil War or the restoration of the crown after the Civil War, people are escaping the upheaval and the violence that came with those acts. So, the British colonies will be very different north to south. And you can see early on, the British really hug the coast because in the interior, there were things that they didn't know and people they didn't know. So they really hug the coast at first. Now, the colonies differed, French, Spanish, from the British because the British did not want to set up a really centralized monarchy here or a centralized empire. Remember, we talked about the Spanish and the French were top down from the king down. When the British come, They set up a system called salutary neglect, and they will let local people set up laws to help establish the colonies. Now, the king will send over royal governors, okay? So the British crown is in charge, and then they put the royal governors that are sent over here to be in charge. But sometimes these colonial assemblies and local councils are set up. They will try and control the royal governor because oftentimes early on, the colonies are in charge of the money. The colonial assemblies and the councils are in charge of the monies that are brought in, and they will limit the amount of money that the royal governor has to operate. So, the British colonies were really dependent on the different people that came over, like I mentioned. Some came over for wealth, some came over to escape persecution, both religiously and during wars. So it just depends where the British settled as to what they were really viewing as society should look like. Okay. So the British also never really tried to convert people. Remember, the Spanish and the French are Catholic, the British were Protestants, and they weren't as concerned about converting the American Indians to different Protestant sects. And the British, unlike the French and the Spanish, the British did not intermarry much with the American Indians either. What did they want from the American Indians? Their land. And oftentimes it got violent. Now, the New England colonies, and we'll talk about this later when we talk more about the New England colonies, but they are more structured around family because most people that came to New England, most people, not everyone, it was religious based, the reason for emigration. And the southern colonies, like in Virginia, a lot of people came there to make money, and we'll talk about the southern colonies more in detail later. But you get Southerners that come to make money, and then you'll have the introduction of slave labor. Okay. So that will do it for this section. Okay. So if I talk too fast, remember you can go back and pause it and then take the notes. All right. I hope you have a great day, and I hope things are going well for you. And remember, tomorrow we'll meet up and we will, you can ask questions about this if you have any, if any arise. Okay. So have a good rest of your day. Take care. We'll see you.